see the wait till you see the real ADD kick in. Rita, you want me to date this? Here, I'm coming. I don't.
They get me in any higher, you won't be able to see me.
Right. God, I was looking for a dog fight on that church. I guess that's all. We missed no fun tonight.
Much too formal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doing very well.
56.
Mr. Keating, I know you're all ready, so could I see you for 1 second? Not 1 second, 1 minute. I'll keep an eye on the clock.
Yeah, I can't.
How you doing? Good to see you.
Yeah, some stuff out on Trend Island. Kind of like okay. That happened when you get something to them the first time, and they say it's okay. I mean, that's, I think that's it. Have you been out there? It is. We're gonna be going in on the east coast, Megan is going to help us, and then in the openings we're creating right behind that mangrove bed. We're gonna be augmenting the mangrove to kind of move the transition, try to exclude the hazard. The natural family, friends, yeah, and there's a little bit of a ruin that's out there.
Thank you.
The hammock that's out there.
January 28th, 2010, Indian River County meeting for the Planning and Zoning Commission will now come to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The public discussion item A has been pulled and will be rescheduled at a later date. Anyone in the audience who is interested? Now I need a motion for approval of minutes of January the 14th, 2010.
Mr. Chair, I'll so move.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Thank you. And so, we have an audience this evening. We thank you very much for being here. Hope you can contribute and hope you learn quite a lot about government and bureaucracy.
Staying awake.
So I'll now turn the meeting over to Bob and staff for consideration of the draft years.
Actually, Bill Shute is going to start the presentation of the year-based amendments that we're workshopping tonight.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. A little over a year ago, and let me get this slide so it advances here. Yeah. A little over a year ago, the county adopted its evaluation and appraisal report of the county's comprehensive plan, or EAR for short. The EAR was approved by the state on February 25th, 2009, and as approved document cannot be changed. Overall, the EAR concluded that the county is doing a good job, but updates and revisions are needed for each element of the comprehensive plan. The draft EAR-based amendments incorporate EAR findings and recommendations as approved by the state. Tonight we're reviewing 5 of the county's draft EAR-based comp plan elements. I will be, sorry, I gotta hit fast forward on that. I will be reviewing the introductory element, the capital improvements element, and the economic development element. And Roland DuBois, and I'm not sure if Andy's going to be doing as well, but they're going to take on the conservation element and coastal management element. Before discussing each element, I want to first briefly review the relationship between the EAR and draft comp plan elements and the general actions taken with the data and so forth from the EAR. Because the draft EAR-based comp plan elements were revised and incorporate the findings and recommendations of the EAR, you should be able to compare each EAR element to each draft comp plan element and see specific changes recommended by the EAR in each draft comp plan element. Each draft comp plan element is subdivided into an existing conditions section, an analysis section, and goals, objectives, and policies. The existing conditions and analysis sections of each element were completely rewritten. Because of the extension revisions, however, only the goal, objectives, and policy sections of each element are shown with strike through and underline. The goal, objectives, and policies are the most important part of any plan. The goal provides the big picture, where you're going. The objectives tell you how you're going to get there, or the target ends, and the policies are the actions and strategies to actually how you're going to get there. Definitions of what a goal, objective, and policy are shown on the slide here, and they're directly taken from 9J5 of the Florida Administrative Code. I won't go through those in detail. In discussing each element, county staff is intending to just provide a brief overview of changes made. If there's a specific question that you have, please stop me and bring them up in the presentation. The introductory element is limited in scope in that it primarily consists of updating the data analysis section, and there is no goal, there are no objectives and policy section within this element. With the capital improvements element, this is a unique element in that it's actually updated every year. It goes before the Board of County Commissioners. Staff gets together and reviews the capital improvements element, the CIP, the Capital Improvements Program, which is an attachment to that element, and updates all the projects in there, the monetary amounts. We coordinate with the budget staff extensively on revising budget estimates for the county and updating all the text data analysis. with the year-based amendment, we only had one change to Objective 1, and it was really more with the wording rather than substance. The substance is still consistent with the requirements of 9J5 of the Florida Administrative Code. As mentioned earlier, with the year-based amendments, you should be able to compare the year to each draft comp plan element. However, with the economic development element, it's been a work in progress for quite some time. Even before we did the year, many of the policies have been moved around. You will not be able to directly compare them to the year. So there's been a lot of work with, primarily at the Economic Development Council, with some feedback and input from Economic Development Division members of the Chamber of Commerce and others. The overall purpose of the economic development element is to create high-paying jobs. All of the objectives and policies relate to this, with most of the actions and activities directed to the Economic Development Division of the Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Development Council. Just a few of the objectives and policy revisions, two of which relate to land use or land use regulations, will be discussed here. Objective 4 is being revised from a more generalized objective to specifically focusing on the establishment of 2 separate industrial, business, technology, research, we kind of lump all that together, parks within the county by 2015. And that objective can be found on page 51 of the economic development element. Objective 5 is also being revised from a more generalized objective to specifically focusing on adoption of an interlocal agreement with the municipalities within the county for coordinated economic development activities. And there is a new policy, Policy 4.5, that emphasizes the importance of using county plan development regulations to guide appropriate design and uses in the new industrial, business, research, technology parks. And that can be found on page 53 of that element. With that, that's the last slide of this presentation. So if you have questions.
I had oh, go ahead. Sorry. I had a question on the, now I've lost where it was, on the capital improvements. I didn't really figure it was enough to interrupt you. What do we have a pari-mutuel tax on? Do we have betting going on in the county?
You missing something?
Yeah.
I mean,
Not that I know of, but I think what it is I think all the counties in the state share a portion of the pari-mutuel tax. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd like to let the audience know, anybody that just came in, that public discussion A on Lakeside Fellowship Baptist Church has been pulled and will not be heard tonight, but will be rescheduled.
in case you're here for that.
In case you're here for that.
When you have, Bill, when you have the economic development and then you have like the conservation element, do we overlap? I was trying to figure out like New Planet Energy, someone who, I was trying to find them both, where it would be in both elements. So there is an overlap. We've got new business, and yet we have conservation. So there is a home for that in both ears?
Yeah, and I was going to say the economic development element actually focuses on some uses, like even biotech, but also agricultural uses for biofuel and stuff of that nature.
I know that.
But that's actually a good point. And one of the things about comprehensive plans is they're comprehensive. Right. They deal with just about everything we do. And so they deal with a broad array of topics. And what you will see is that overlap that you pointed out, and it's really good that you did. We do have policies in the economic development element to attract biofuels industries, and we address it in the conservation element, and we address it in the land use element, and we may even address it in another element or two. But there is various overlap just because we've kind of got the entire plan segmented into those different topic areas.
Comprehensive. It's like my wife. She thumps my ear if I'm, and has a comprehensive opinion about everything.
Be careful, George.
Oh, God,
I'm not-
recording this.
Kept up with the commission because I've got DirecTV, so I don't get to watch, and so I read the paper and I look at the internet. But, there's probably things that have happened certainly that I am not aware of. But I want to make a comment about the industrial parks and the concept of the technical parks, and I know it says before 2015, which means it could happen at any time, basically, but still, we're looking out to 2015 to have something like that. And I was at a meeting in Sebastian, and it wasn't the Sebastian Chamber member that made the comment, but they were talking about the polarization that has occurred in the county in the last few years between the business community and some other entities. And they were saying that outside entities, corporations, etc., that could possibly be considering coming to Indian River County were picking up a negative feeling about Indian River County and business associated with Indian River County. And looking at the time frames associated with our getting in step with what's happening right now, to the south of us, they are being relatively successful at being very aggressive about contact. Instead of waiting for somebody that might want to come here, and they look at the newspaper for 3 years, and then they fly in and make their own observations, look at our schools, etc. They're being much more aggressive about making the contacts with the types of and groups that they would like to come to this Treasure Coast area. Don't know whether you're supposed to say names or not, but Dr. Massey certainly has an enormous vision of the future, not only for the Treasure Coast area, but for the kind of jobs that we're going to have in the future, and has been aggressive about developing the facilities available to train kids for what we can do in the future. And I know that St. Lucie County, I don't think they have the Chamber of Commerce or the Commission that work independently toward trying to make these contacts, but they have a separate entity who doesn't really answer to either one, and they certainly go out aggressively to find the types of corporations that they would like to have there. And it is life science directed and technologically directed. I have a couple of questions. One is, or a statement. I would rather see us more aggressive about having things available so that if we get the opportunity to get one of those types of groups in, we have enormous amenities here in Indian River County. We don't have probably the labor force, perhaps, that St. Lucie County has, but we've certainly got a great place to live. And it's very close to those areas. But I think we should be more aggressive in Indian River County about getting ready for those opportunities. And my other question is, in looking at the monies, when we have a plan like this, and I know the Commission can do anything basically it wants to year by year, but are we looking at the capability of being able to have that kind of a program? Because it costs money to go out and look for those types of groups, and it costs money to have the things in place. Do we have that, basically, Bob, in our plan?
To some extent, yes. But let me make a few points. Right now, the Indian River County Chamber of Commerce is the county's designated economic development agency, and the county does appropriate a certain amount of money every year for the chamber's activities. Recently, the Economic Development Council, which is one of the Board of County Commissioners' committees out there, has actually been discussing coming up with a dedicated funding source for economic development. So that is one thing on the table. It's definitely more difficult in these economic times than it would have been, say, 3 years ago during the boom But that is one thing that they are looking at.
But to
Let me-
Greg's point, we don't have it specifically listed as an objective in the EAR, right?
We don't have it as an objective. We don't have a policy, do we?
That says
Bill?
we should do, I mean, as the county, we should do this, which is what creates the objective and helps move along the formality of creating something.
Right. We don't have an objective by saying, like, by 2012, the county will have a dedicated funding source for economic development.
Right,
That is,
right.
that is
I
an
mean, it's
option.
been left kind of nebulous. It always has, I guess.
And in these economic times, Bob, I would just say that this is when we should have those monies available to be able to do it now. And probably the payback, the dollar for dollar payback is going to be much greater than if we don't have that available and can't compete with the counties to the south of us who are aggressively doing so.
But by
I can't-
definition, you need to know what you want it for, more specifically,
Yeah.
maybe.
And let me just tell you, I think the county has, even though that we don't have a dedicated funding source, the county has been appropriating money when we've needed it for incentives. And just to give you an example, in the last year, the county has increased the amount of jobs grant money that we're giving out. We now give out between $3,000 and $7,000 per job. And in the past 6 months, we have approved jobs grants for 3 companies. And what happens is the board, this is money that's allocated over a 3-year period, so it doesn't have to be all at once, and even a longer period because some of the jobs aren't being created for several years. But the Board of County Commissioners, even though we don't have a dedicated funding source, is actually funding that jobs grant program, so we're doing that. And you'll see this in the backup of the element in the data and analysis. The other thing is the board has agreed to go to referendum this fall for a economic development property tax abatement program. So in essence, that'll be kind of like a self-fulfilling funding source. It's not so much allocating money, but saying a economic development company that comes here doesn't have to pay money, so it's kind of like the same thing.
How competitive do you think we are, Bob, on the Treasure Coast and regionally with our incentives?
Well, let me tell you something. If you look at some of the biotech jobs that St. Lucie County got, they paid, I think for Torrey Pines, the amount was about $440,000 per job. I mean, that is a pretty healthy incentive. And I don't know where the cost benefit comes in there. That's a significant amount. We have done incentive analysis, us compared to the other. We've compared ourselves to Brevard and St. Lucie. And once we get tax abatement, I think we will have most of the tools in the toolbox that they have. And there's also the opportunity for individual companies, for the board to negotiate more incentives for them, incentives that we don't have specifically listed, but that they can give. And I think Piper's an example. The county and the city together were successful in keeping Piper. And at the peak, we're looking particularly with, I think, the production of the jet, we're talking about 1,500 jobs. And I mean, I think that was a significant accomplishment that the county did. Unfortunately, it's not looking as good now because of the economic times, but that really doesn't have anything to do with Piper. It has everything to do with the economy out there, the availability of credit, and everything else. So I think actually that showed that maybe we're not that bad compared to others. We beat out Oklahoma City and what was the other?
New Mexico.
Albuquerque.
Albuquerque?
So once we get tax abatement in the toolbox, and we've got the jobs grant and we've got various other smaller incentives, I think we're generally okay.
Do we have land available compared to, say, St. Lucie and Martin County? And where are they on their industrial parks? We're looking at 2015 perhaps, but where are they in that? And just as an addition, Bob, before you answer the question, I agree with you about Piper. Piper's very important to us, and with their jet, and now they're going to sports aircraft, it looks like the company that owns them really wants to expand what Piper is, and that's wonderful. But I think a sustainable type of industry of the future, the very near future, is our biotechs. And, it would be great if we can balance out the Piper type of industry with the biotech industries, because they certainly are a great part of the future and certainly something that America is going to be able to do, hopefully. And
let me answer your industrial park question, but first let me just tell you, economic development is very difficult. Every local government out there is competing with a shrinking pie, competing for a shrinking pie. This country lost 3 million manufacturing jobs in the last 6 or 7 years. And that historically was what all the economic development types were looking at, the manufacturing types of jobs. I think it's expanded now into biotech, medical, and others. But even that, you have a lot of local governments, a lot of agencies competing for very few companies. And that's just what makes it real difficult. And particularly when you look at how many companies every year are actually moving, or how many big companies are being created, the opportunity out there is really pretty slim, and it's a real difficult thing to do to create jobs. If you look at every section of the country, you look at the Midwest, you look at Michigan, Ohio, with what's happened to the automakers and the other heavy industries are up there. You look at what happened to us in the Southwest with the construction industry. I mean, right now, economic development is on every local government's mind, and every local government is competing for the same small pot. But that being said, what our economic development of the comp plan, and this is a discretionary element. Every other element except the introductory element, economic development element in the comp plan, they're mandated by the state. We are one of, I can't really say one of a very few, but we are one of the counties that has this as an optional element, so the county has actually thought enough of economic development to actually put it in the comp plan. In terms of industrial parks, you will see in the element that the analysis says that's one of the most important things to have, is to have actually building ready lots out there so that a company can come in, and really most of the groundwork's been done. All of the major off-site traffic improvements have been done. The water and sewer is in place. The stormwater has been taken care of. And one of the good things is we have 2 parks out there that have been built in the last few years. They haven't been platted. They're sitting there with the infrastructure in, all ready to be final platted. One's the Indian River Park of Commerce, where the CVS distribution center is, and the other one's across the street. It's the Indian River Industrial Park, I think, something like that. So we've got 2 parks that are ready to pull the trigger in. You're also going to be seeing a comp plan amendment that we're going to be bringing to you this year. Hopefully the only amendment we get in the January cycle, that we're going to be looking at expanding the State Road 60 I-95 node, and to bring in the Corrigan property. And I don't want to go into too much, I don't want to waste a lot of time right now, but I don't know if you know that the Corrigans are looking at putting almost all of their property west of I-95 in a mitigation bank. They're going to be creating wetlands out there, and this is an opportunity now to get a little bit of that property for expansion of that node out there and the creation of industrial parks. And along with that, we've got 3 other property owners whose property we're going to be bringing in. But I think you'll really think a lot of this amendment when it comes in. And the objective here is to get either an expansion of the Indian River Park of Commerce or another large industrial park out there, so that we can have buildable ready lots.
For long-range planning along those lines, eventually we're going to be having a interchange at Oslo and I-95. So do we have long-range plans looking at trying to do an industrial park in that area as well?
Yes, over the years, we've talked, a number of years ago, we talked to Reed Knight about doing an industrial park out there near his facility, and we do have property designated as industrial out there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right now,
Already got it.
the interchange isn't as imminent as I wish it were.
We
Right
may
now,
need
we
that to
just
swap for the turns out there with the landowners now first.
Pardon me.
We can use that to swap for the land on the right-of-way later.
And actually, that's what we've thought about.
Right.
Bob, I'll say one last thing on it. I appreciate all the information you've provided, but the reasons you've given, the number of groups out there that we could draw, etc., would cause me to believe that we should be just as aggressive as we can with having things in place and having the money available to be able to do that. Because, as you say, there just may be a few out there that we can get after.
Penny Chandler talked to you this week?
Sounds like it.
She will now.
Anything else from the commission?
No?
Thank you. Okay, you got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Roland DeBlois, Chief of Environmental Planning and Code Enforcement. I'll be presenting an overview of the conservation element and the coastal management element. We also have Senior Environmental Planner Annie Sobczak here, who put a lot of work into these elements as well, and we're both here to answer questions. Looking at the overhead, as it was pointed out earlier, there are a number of elements. There's actually 15 elements and sub-elements in the overall comprehensive plan. What I'm first going to talk about is the conservation element. As Bob mentioned, and just to reemphasize, there is overlap between this element and some of the others in the common objectives. In the conservation element, however, there's certain major focuses or issues that I'd like to just touch base on. For example, protection and improvement of water quality in the lagoon and the St. Sebastian River is a focus. Also, protection of groundwater quality and quantity. And a big part of the conservation element is sustainability of natural systems, conservation of wildlife corridors and greenways, and also management of conservation lands that have been acquired over the years. Just to hit a few highlights on that are in the data and analysis of the updated draft of this element. Since 1990, the county's been pretty aggressive, and with help from the state as well. When P2000 and Florida Forever came online, a lot of counties have gotten into the conservation land acquisition business, including Indian River County, and since 1990, the county has acquired or contributed to the acquisition of over 12,000 acres at 37 sites. There's also been some progress in the past decade on certain habitat conservation plans for particular species that are imperiled. We have a sea turtle habitat conservation plan, manatee protection plan, Sebastian area-wide scrub jay habitat conservation plan, so there has been progress on certain fronts. There's also been water quality improvement projects implemented. For example, Stormwater Park in Sebastian, the muck removal in the Sebastian River. We have the Main Relief Canal Pollution Control Facility, the Egret and Spoonbill Marsh projects, and also some sub-regional stormwater treatment facilities in Roseland, Gifford, and Vero Lake Estates. Last year, when we did the evaluation and appraisal report process, we went through the 12 objectives of this element, and through that process, there are recommendations either to maintain or revise target dates of those objectives. In this revision to the conservation element, which is based on the EAR process. Most of these objectives pretty much remain the same, but have been updated with dates, with some tweaking based on the EAR process. What I'm going to do is just talk about a couple of these to highlight. And one of those is Objective 2 under surface water quality. This is the objective as it's written in the draft conservation element. By 2020, water quality throughout the lagoon and St. Sebastian River will at minimum meet state class 3 water quality standards and state class 2 standards where practicable. Right now, the main water body in the county that doesn't meet these current standards is the St. Sebastian River. While there's been some improvements, it's still, I understand, it's under the class 3 category, which is one of the lower class of the class 3 and 2. The other thing that's been pointed out during this revision process, we've been working with the Conservation Lands Advisory Committee and some other committees, is that the state is actually in the process of updating their classifications based on some EPA directions, and they're in the midst of that. It hasn't happened yet, but we are tracking it. But for now, we're keeping the classification references as they are. For example, there was a period in November where they were looking at developing human use versus aquatic life categories, but since then they've actually changed it. So now they're looking at developing some subclasses of the class 3 waters. So it's a moving target right now, but it's something that we're monitoring, and depending on the timing of it, we would incorporate it or reference it in this element and other elements.
Roland, just a second. I'd like to, this is a workshop-like atmosphere that we want here, and I want to encourage members of the audience. We don't have a lot of people, but if you have a question at the time, it's fine if you raise your hand and we answer that question, or the staff answers the question at the time. Roland, Mr. Tripson has a question.
With the St. Sebastian River demucking project, and I think you said part of it, but I didn't really catch it. Has it actually worked? Has the quality come up some?
I think the general, I don't know for sure the actual monitoring results, but I think the general thought is yes, it's a positive for improving the quality. So much so that they've actually done other demucking projects, not just Sebastian, but I think they're doing one in Micco over the county line. And so I think it is a positive thing that is being looked at and monitored.
It'll probably take time to actually,
monitoring
to see how much it does improve it. Okay, thanks.
Can you give an example, Roland, of class 3, class 2 that lay people would understand, like you see the fish at the bottom or something?
Well, I think just generally, class 1 is the top water quality category, and that's essentially potable water potential. And actually in Indian River County, the St. John's Upper Basin is class 1. We're focusing on the estuarine water bodies, but in actuality, that's an example. Class 2 is a higher quality than 3. That's essentially where there's shellfish harvesting potential in the Indian River Lagoon, and the general areas for that are roughly in the Pelican Island National Wildlife Refuge area, and then also at the South County line near St. Lucie. Class 3 is kind of the default category for general water quality in the lagoon, where there can be, it's good for recreational use and fishing, things like that. So that's roughly the categories.
Thank you.
What we have on the overhead now is just a few of the policies that are proposed new. And again, this came out through the EAR process, and this is essentially the next step of actually revising the plan to put some of these in. So some of these may look familiar to you from the last time around and the other hearings, but just to highlight a few, under this proposed draft, policy 2.15 calls for monitoring of water quality data for the Indian River Lagoon and St. Sebastian River to determine, kind of relates to the mucking project question, is to monitor it to see what the successes or failures are of some of these projects and to determine where maybe new projects could be needed if funding becomes available.
Along those lines, with the Spoonbill Marsh, and hopefully it's going to be good, but do we have any contingency plan in case it doesn't work? I mean, or are we just, really just putting all our eggs in that basket?
I think one of the contingency plans would be we could dispose of the brine at the Vero Beach deep injection well. So that's one. But we're going to have to. One of the things you'll see in this element is, actually, I think you see it in the potable water element. The county has to look at either another Spoonbill Marsh type of project for the South County RO plant or some other method to keep the brine from getting into the lagoon.
Thanks.
Okay, some other policies under surface water quality. There's a reference of a policy 216 to support the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan for the lagoon. Also, one of the things we're looking at is under 2.17 policy is requiring shoreline protection buffers and exempting platted lots on existing seawalls. We actually do currently have river buffer requirements. This is really to form it into a policy and to also account for things that we've learned over the years, that when you apply these buffers to, say, platted lots and bulkheaded canals that are all grass lawns, there's only so much of a benefit to an added buffer. And we're looking here to be some practical revisions based on what we've found in the implementation. And also an important one is the National Estuary Program Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan. Actions were draft revisions in 2008, and we're looking to be consistent with those objectives and policies that are being proposed through that entity. Another objective, for as an example highlight, is groundwater quality and quantity. Again, we do have a separate element on groundwater aquifer, but there's some overlap and inclusion in this element. The objective is through 2025 that there would be no reduction in the quality and quantity of either the superficial aquifer or the Floridan aquifer. And one of the policies that's being proposed, again, that came through the evaluation and appraisal report process, was to consider the county obtaining an updated geohydrology study based on the fact that we had relied on a study that done by the U.S. Geological Service. It's more than 20 years old, and this might help identify areas of concern or interest in the county as far as water supply.
Is the 2015 rolling because of cost?
It's partly because of cost. It's also because of time. I think when we had the representative from USGS come to one of the meetings, I think he said it would take about 3 years.
3 to 5 years.
Of activity. So that's why we kind of put it out there. Another objective to highlight is Objective 7, Wildlife and Marine Habitat. Through 2025, there will be no reduction in the critical habitat of endangered or threatened aquatic or terrestrial species, the flora and fauna occurring in the county. There's a couple of policies, new policies that are in the draft. Policy 7.9, right now we have a kind of a regional HCP for scrub jays up near Sebastian, but we don't have a county-wide habitat conservation plan. So we're looking to coordinate with the municipalities and the agencies to come up with a more comprehensive approach to not only scrub jay habitat, but management, but also other species that are interrelated. We're also looking at going through a process of obtaining official receiver site certification for gopher tortoises, since the state has revised its policies on gopher tortoises and requiring relocation for development. There's also a reference to an adoption of steps recommended by the Treasure Coast, or Sustainable Treasure Coast Committee, which promotes, among other things, for sustainable resources, a combination of land acquisition, clustering, conservation easements, most of which we're already into, but this sort of immortalizes it into a policy. On commercial uses of natural resources, again, this is similar to the policy we have, but basically to provide opportunities for commercial use of resources, but in doing it in a way where there's no adverse impacts, environmental impacts to the county's resources. Some new policies and revised policies. As you know, in the past year or two, there's been substantial revisions to the mining and excavation regulations, and policy 9.1 would essentially, again, emphasize the policy of the county to regulate mining and excavation through various pollution prevention plans, water quality data collection and monitoring at outfalls, and dust control plans. Also, we have a policy to address concerns that were expressed on agricultural disease host plants, particularly related to unmaintained citrus groves, where the trees would be either removed from abandoned citrus groves or otherwise treated to deter disease harboring. Finally, we also have a policy on promoting Green County certification, which the county has received gold status, and continue to try to make progress and find ways to promote green construction and activities.
Roland, before you move on page 70, under this item, it says the agricultural, fisheries, and forestry industries employ 3,505 inhabitants of Indian River County in 2000. Do we have any more recent figures than that, than 10-year-old figures? I mean, this is kind of where we have an overlap with the economic ears.
In some cases, we're able to find more recent data than others. For example, on that same page, we have 2006 data for commercial fishing trips. It is a challenge that we found that some of the references are harder to find because they're just not keeping the same databases up. This is one where we could not find a more recent one, but it is something we probably need to look at over the next month or two while we're refining this to see that we have the most up-to-date reference. But I think we left it in here for
well, it's a good point of reference.
For at least some sort of reference point.
Roland, before you go into your proposed new policies, based on, you just were talking about the agricultural lands, and we're going to add the policy about removal of dead trees. One of the things when I was reading the policy itself is that we need to probably either put in a plan or a reference to potential other uses, and I'm thinking that these are things that are relatively new: stormwater storage, and how we're going to mitigate this in the county. It overlaps into surface water storage because you can draw use and protection of your groundwater. Then with biofuels, we're talking about the biofuel plants and how we're going to work that in. What I want to be sure of is that we don't create a policy somewhere, or we have some note somewhere in the policies that we're friendly to that use. We don't create an objective that says that would conflict with that down the road, because those are serious potentials.
You're definitely going to see that at your second meeting in February when we go over the future land use element.
Okay, it's going to come in there.
And Roland, I don't even know, do we have reference in the conservation element? I can't remember.
I saw it stopped kind of at the trees, and I just didn't know if we could put a paragraph or there's a way to reference in the conservation that we encourage this use or something that just doesn't conflict.
We have specifically water farming, and we talk about the
in the coming land
in the future land.
Yeah, I think we touch base in the conservation element on the biofuel alternative. That type of thing, but we don't really get into.
You don't have anything specifics.
I don't think we have specific policies.
And it's probably in the other land use, but I noticed it since we're doing the overlaps. The other was, and if you'll remember, we've talked about this several times, and had to do with the management of. We have all these conservation lands, and we have a very general management policy. And I don't, we had when as other people were up here, there was a lot of concern about what the county is going to do about how we're going to manage the green space that we do, or conservation lands that we have, whether we're clearing or how that's done. And I found this, just the paragraph in here about the management in general, but I didn't see anything that we had any objectives to either add management or, oversee or see.
Actually, objective 12
Did I miss it?
on page 142.
Oh, I was asleep by
Getting,
then. I dozed off about page 98. So.
And I can tell you, the Conservation Lands Advisory Committee is aggressive in helping staff
I mean, one thing
with
that was
management.
suggested is that there's a strong possibility we have that that it's used as a volunteer base. I mean, we have a coordinator in the county, and then we have a volunteer group that kind of assumes the role in each area. But it was something that you hate to get something or have these lands and then have it wasted because it's overgrown or whatever.
Yeah, we actually do have a number of volunteer groups that we are involved with certain properties, and we certainly are looking to promote that. As a matter of fact, there's a property that we're on the verge of buying that was approved by the commission in the past couple of weeks, that one of the attractions of it is there is a nonprofit on site next to it, and they volunteered to be the managers. So it is an important aspect that you bring up.
Whenever this comes up, I mean, that's one of the things that governmentally we sometimes worry about, that we buy this or have it, but we don't really manage it well in the future, and I'd like to see this.
Believe me, we worry about it on
deal
a day-to-day
with that.
basis.
Okay.
And
I know you hear about it.
I'm on that committee, and
In that case, I'm.
well, yeah, thanks, George. And I think as we get more volunteer groups to adopt an individual conservation land, like we've got Prang Island, Cypress Bend, then the Russell property,
Flynn Track.
the Flynn Track is with the land trust. As we get more groups and it's publicized, I think more groups will come forward, or neighborhoods around the properties will say, well, hey, let's help, bash exotics or do whatever needs to be done. I don't think we're going to be able to have too much of an impact when it comes to like roller chopping or burning. That's got to be done by professionals.
Right. But the other only last item within this, as you move on, was the thoughts within the land conservation purchasing. Is there any recommendations? I didn't see anything about bonding or raising any more money. Did I miss that?
Loved it.
We kind of thought about the
I know the word money is dodged periodically, all the time, especially now. So,
matter of fact, we had a discussion with the Conservation Lands Committee as far as one of our objectives, which was to target how many acres in the next 10, 20 years. And we kind of shot low at first because of the lack of funding availability, not only at the county level, but at the matching fund level. But as we discussed it through with some of the committee members, we concluded that there's other mechanisms out there these days. For example, conservation easements associated with development and things like that.
I just think that, it's like one of those things that, you may not want to have it written down, but on the other hand, I think you don't want to lose sight of that, and you ought to keep pushing it, because you're never going to have a better opportunity than now, if that's what you want.
And we do have objective 6 in there, where we are now much more aggressive than we were. We're looking at 5,000 acres, Roland.
Right.
So.
Roland, I'm sorry. I have to roll back to the question of the statistic on the number of people employed in ag, fisheries, and forestries on page 70 being 3,500. In your introductory element, and that was in 2000. Introductory element on page 31 has a table. It doesn't address each of those categories. It only addresses ag. Agricultural workers in 2008, it's listing 2641, so that would mean that there were 800 and some odd people in fisheries and forestry. So there might be a way of piecing together
Okay, well, we'll
more
double,
recent.
we'll double check
fishy
that
people in
and
the
just
county.
see what we can.
Unless
We'll make a note of that.
less citrus
Try to
acres,
fix
too.
Yeah, I mean, you've got part of the numbers there.
If I could, just to wrap up our presentation on this element, on the overhead are just some miscellaneous policies. Some of these we've alluded to. Just a couple things. We now require stormwater pollution prevention plans for virtually all development projects, and there's a policy now to reference that. We also, as a community, participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, and they have what's called a community rating system, which is kind of a federal incentive for localities to do more than the minimum, and we're keeping up with that. So there are, so these are just a few of the things we're doing in addition to what I've mentioned. If there's no more questions, I'd like to move on to the next.
Roland, I'd like to ask you a question about the, I'm sorry I didn't ask it before, about surface water quality improvement. I wonder, since in the capital improvements element, there are entries here for North Relief Canal Treatment System and South Relief Canal Treatment Systems with dollar amounts in specific years, whether or not you couldn't incorporate that in your objectives. That, I mean, you've got a 2012, 2013, $9 million for the North Relief Treatment System, 2.2, and I mean, so these are things, these are actions that the county is going to take that will have demonstrable effects, positive effects on surface water quality. I think you ought to get all the goodies you can get out of it by incorporating that as a specific objective. Same with the South Relief. That's on page 73, capital improvement.
Okay.
I think that's a good point. We will.
It's tough. I mean, these things really do fit together.
Yeah,
Right.
they really do.
Sorry, George.
It's okay with me.
Okay, moving on to the coastal management element. This element pertains to essentially the eastern half of the county, what is generally the watershed, overall watershed of the Indian River Lagoon. And it captures most, if not all, of the developing portion of the county. This element is kind of a catch-all of all the issues in the coastal zone, and it does, again, overlap other elements in particular. Particular focus are coastal marine resources protection, manatee protection, and marina sighting and boating safety. In fact, our manatee protection plan, all the policies and objectives of that manatee plan have been incorporated into this element. Public access to coastal resources, limit on expenditures in the coastal high hazard area, and natural disaster planning. There's a lot of interrelationship with our emergency services planning. For data and analysis, just a brief summary. Estuarine water quality over the past 10 years or so has been consistent overall with fluctuation at various points. Seagrasses are relatively stable in the county, though they're seasonal and fluctuations. Water quality improvements projects have been implemented, like I indicated in the previous element discussion. In addition to what I mentioned in our acquisition program, as far as acquisitions, about 900 acres of it have been acquired in the Indian River Lagoon Blueway, adjacent to the Indian River Lagoon. As I mentioned previously, we've adopted habitat conservation plans within the coastal zone. We also have the beach preservation plan, which focuses on areas of critical erosion on the beaches. And we've been limiting development densities in the coastal high hazard area. And this, one thing I want to point out, which came out in the evaluation and appraisal report, is that the actual state definition of the coastal high hazard area has changed, and it's being reflected in this plan. It used to be based on the evacuation zone for Category 1 hurricanes. It's now based on the storm surge line of Category 1 hurricanes. And if you look at these two comparative maps, briefly, the new definition actually takes properties out of that category on the Barry Islands, because the storm surge is not where it's an evacuation zone, but on the other hand, it adds properties on the St. Sebastian River. This element has 14 objectives. which were mostly through the EAR process recommended for revising timelines, but otherwise maintaining them. A few examples: beaches and dunes. The objective is to protect the natural functions of the beach and dune. No unmitigated human-related disturbance. Some of the things that are being proposed here, again, just to evaluate the dune stabilization setback line that the county has. It's been a while since it's been evaluated, and just to see if where it is appropriate or maybe it should change. Also, the state is looking at a statewide habitat conservation plan for Florida beaches, and we're looking to just cooperate with that process. Another item is due to some on-site disposal system or septic tank failures during the hurricanes, where we had some on the beach. We're looking at promoting new oceanfront development to hook up the public sewer when it's available. As far as public access, we're promoting a public access to coastal resources. And some of the policies proposed under this objective are looking to look into building a boat ramp at the Gifford Dock Road, which has been discussed during the EAR process. Also to carry out the limited beach access at Captain Forster Hammock Preserve. Right now that preserve has jungle trail front access but not beach access. And also to provide ongoing assistance to Fish and Wildlife with the Pelican Island Refuge access improvement maintenance. Just some miscellaneous policies. Again,
Where
there's
does the
overlap.
Oslo boat ramp fall in here?
Yeah.
Lots of places.
Who picks up their trash?
Where did the Oslo boat ramp? I didn't see. I was just curious. I saw the Gifford, but I mean.
Well, the county's already done
I mean, is that out of here because it's actually in process?
Yeah, we didn't really focus on it as a policy because it's in process.
But I mean, I was thinking, the only reason I'm asking is I know we talked about the Gifford boat ramp, but in the process on the Oslo boat ramp, the policy and all was with the protection of the river. It was one of the reasons the initial plan could not be expanded any further than, I guess, the current plan. And I noticed that there's movement afoot to put in a bigger dock and have more access and a boat dock and kind of a broaden the plan. And it's kind of out past us now, at least I think it has. But I was just curious how that would have been affected within the policy process here, because we started off with a fairly small ramp. I mean, it was to be protected.
I mean, the Oslo boat ramp improvements are not intended, and they are not expanding it to make it for more boats, bigger boats. What it is to really make it a functional ramp. Right now, there's so much siltation that's gone in. Part of it is just to clean out the siltation that's come from the dirt road. And the boat ramp itself hasn't expanded, it's just been replaced. But that's a work in progress.
In their request to make it bigger, or maybe I misread the paper, I always thought when it was...
It's actually, Roland, it was reduced in scope, wasn't it? Didn't they have originally, or at one time in the process, they had the additional dockage and parking areas, and then in working with some environmental groups, that was reduced.
I didn't want to debate that so much as I just was curious within the policies that we have, thinking about the Gifford or this docks as they go along, how that affects something like the Oslo ramp. Because, I mean, you were talking about the protection.
Well, let me just say this. The manatee, like I said earlier, the manatee protection plan objectives and policies have been adopted into this element. One of the things that the manatee plan does is promotes maintenance and use of existing facilities versus creating new ones, except when a new one is appropriate. When the Oslo boat ramp has been, it's been an issue since the early 90s, and I think what happened in the recent past was it got to a point where it's filled in and got deteriorated to such a point it became virtually unusable. So it was recently, the ramp itself has been replaced with minimal other improvements, but there is still currently an effort by the County Commission to do further improvements, particularly to define parking, to pull out a lot of silt that's accumulated from the dirt road, particularly after the hurricanes, and to really make it more functional, but without increasing the lane capacity or size of boats that it could accommodate. Now, it's a controversial thing because that is an area of high resource value, and it's, right now it's already initiated, but there's a process of permitting that's going on to essentially balance that functionality improvement with protection of the resources, and
That's what I meant, because one of our policies is protection of seagrasses and conditions in the river, and that's, contrary to a boat ramp when you move and digging channels.
It's not necessarily contrary if what you're doing is defining the channel better and digging out siltation or muck without affecting the seagrasses, and that's one of the things that's being looked at.
Okay, so it fits with what we have.
If it doesn't fit, it's probably not going to happen from a permitting standpoint, is the bottom line.
I think, George, that at this point, Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has not made their determination as to whether or not the proposed plans are an expansion.
This was just an ongoing process. I mean, this is a kind of a current activity
St. John's
relative
does
to the
think
policies
that
we're
it's
talking about, and I was just trying to fit it in, since I didn't see it in here, and it's because we're already
There are those of
moving
us who
ahead.
would think that
Should be in here.
that the plans do create a conflict with the
I
goals
just
of the
was,
manatee
we're
protection
looking at it, the
plan
plans
and the
haven't changed. I mean, it's
conservation
still being
element.
dealt with within the policies as they exist.
Hence, there's
Yeah,
a controversy.
And let me just tell you really how this element relates. First of all, our objective is to provide as much public access as we can to the water bodies. So that's our objective. Now, we do hit on the Gifford Dock Road boat ramp because that's something new we want to do. The reason, I think Roland's correct, the reason we don't specifically call out Oslo here is they're all ancillary type of improvements we're looking at. Paving the road, putting the parking areas there, maybe maintenance, dredging the channel that's there, and some minor kind of like, I guess, dock improvements on the side of the ramp that, like Roland said, is not going to increase the laneage of the ramp. So because they're ancillary improvements, we didn't specifically call it out here. But, we've got the overall objective that access
I
is
just
good.
couldn't see it, and I was kind of wondering why, in light of the plan, I understand.
Anyway, I think that pretty much sums up our presentation. So if there are any further questions or comments, we're here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Actually, let me make one point. Mr. Hamner made a real good point, a real good observation that throughout this entire plan, there are some potentially conflicting objectives. And conservation in coastal zone is a perfect example. Providing access to these waterways when we're trying to preserve the resources is a conflicting objective. Providing boat access and protecting the manatees are potentially conflicting objectives. So that's an important thing to consider, and we'll probably even have some more examples of this when we bring the land use element to you.
Loss of habitat.
Yeah, loss of habitat. So, but anyhow, that was an excellent observation.
Commissioners, other thoughts? Two last things, and I want to give the audience an opportunity again if they have any questions that they would like to ask. But there's an element in there, Bob, and I'm sorry I can't tell you where it is, but it talks about this life science initiative, which, by the way, we were talking a little bit about the polarization, and there's a diverse group of community leaders that have signed off on that life science initiative, and that's a great step forward. But there's a comment in there about working with the school district to cause more science and environmental work in the classroom. How would that be? How does that work?
Actually, a policy like that would just be, and I think that must be in the economic development element.
I think it is.
I'm pretty sure. Generally, that's a cooperative type. Either we'd write a letter or coordinate with the school board staff. I mean, we do a lot of coordinating with the school board staff. Actually, we have a meeting with the staff next week, I think. So it would be done cooperatively.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
just for the, if I could, Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
just for the information of the
Is your mic on?
commission. Just for the information of the commissioners, I actually do attend that with staff, and I already had that on my calendar, so that gives me an opportunity to see it from that side. So if there is a question that comes as a non-voting member, at least I can bring you that information if necessary. But staff always does your county staff always does a very good job of relating that, and a great deal. I will commend staff. We have great cooperation, and they even gave us back our Pleasant Ridge property, so we have to appreciate
You all
that.
still supporting the green concept and building, Carol?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah, we built the Storm Grove Middle School before it was actually mandated that our government buildings had to be green, built to green standards, and we did start that process over a year before the mandate came down from the state.
You had an excused absence, Carol, but Mr. Hamner gave you a great compliment about the success of the new school.
Oh, thank you.
We all adjust.
Well, it was nice that he was there representing, there was a commission meeting going on. We did not do well in timing that particular event, but there was a commission meeting going on, and there were some other things going on. Staff could not attend, and when I called Mr. Hamner as chairman of this group, he not only said yes, but he even took me up on the first-hand in-person tour, and I think he enjoyed that. It was very informative.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Hamner.
Thank you. Commission matters. Planning matters.
Just a couple of items, just so that you guys will make sure you're used to coming to P&Z meetings, because you know you're going to be having both of them in February for sure, for more EAR-based amendments, but also on the February 11th, the next meeting, we'll have the Lakeside Appeal will be rescheduled for there. And on the 25th, besides some of the EAR-based amendment workshops, we will also have land development regulation amendments for landscape ordinance. We had it at the PSAC today, and so you all will be seeing that. And we may also have the Cairns sand mine on the 25th, out west of I-95 off of Oslo Road at 122nd Avenue, with their haul route going up 122nd to State Road 60. So there's a good chance that'll be on the 25th as well. So you will have some items coming up. That's all that I had.
Thank you. Attorney matters?
Nothing tonight, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, staff, for your presentation, and thank you, commissioners, for your interaction. We stand adjourned.
Answer those questions. You did a good job.